The heavy mahogany door locked with a sharp, metallic click that echoed through the quiet law office. My biological father, Arthur Vance, froze mid-laugh, his tailored charcoal suit suddenly looking restrictive as his eyes darted from the heavy brass bolt to the grim face of the estate attorney. For nearly 2 decades, Arthur had spun a web of malicious lies, painting me as an unhinged, dangerous teenager to justify abandoning me. Now, sitting directly across from him at the polished conference table, I watched the arrogant smirk melt from his face as he realized his absolute control over our family had finally shattered. 16 grueling years had crawled by since the stormy night Arthur ruthlessly purged me from his life, dropping a terrified 14-year-old on Aunt Clara's doorstep with nothing but a single canvas duffel bag. He spent the subsequent years poisoning the minds of our entire extended family, assuring anyone who would listen that I was a deceitful, volatile child who desperately needed harsh discipline. Yet, the moment I walked into Clara's estate reading, he looked at my modest attire with deep disdain, loudly remarking that I was still hopelessly desperate for attention. The gathered relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their hushed whispers instantly dying down as I silently removed my trench coat. Arthur impatiently tapped his manicured fingers on the table, loudly demanding that we stop wasting precious time and reveal exactly what Clara had left him. I leaned forward, looking my father dead in the eye, and quietly suggested that he sit down before he completely humiliated himself in front of everyone. His eyes narrowed into dangerous slits as he hissed that a stray child had absolutely no right to silence him within his own family. I reminded him calmly that he had forfeited his right to call us a family the exact moment he left me stranded on a dark porch. Before Arthur could launch into another furious tirade, Mr. Sterling stood up, locked the exit, and announced that no one would be leaving until he explained the massive fraud. The distinct sound of that heavy lock sliding into place instantly transported my mind back to the terrifying night I learned the true meaning of isolation. I was 14 years old, shivering violently in a torrential downpour outside Aunt Clara's brick townhouse, my shoulders aching beneath the weight of my school backpack. My father had refused to even turn off the car engine, letting the headlights cut through the dark sheets of rain. My mother had stood beside me under a large umbrella, perfectly dry and emotionally detached, resembling a postal worker delivering a troublesome package she couldn't wait to get rid of. I remembered gripping the wet nylon strap of my bag, begging her to tell me what I had done wrong, but Beatrice refused to meet my eyes. She coldly stated that my aunt had always expressed a desire for real responsibility, so now she was finally getting exactly what she wanted. When I demanded an explanation from the car, Arthur rolled his window down a mere inch, his voice cutting through the storm. He told me that children who spy on adults and steal private financial records do not deserve the protection of a wealthy, respectable household. I screamed back that the savings account belonged to my grandmother and was legally meant for my future, asking why the balance was completely empty. His jaw tightened in fury as he told me that ungrateful children don't get to enjoy adult privileges, just as Aunt Clara's front door flew wide open. Clara stood on the porch in a silk robe, her hair piled messily on her head, looking at my soaked clothes. By the following morning, Clara had already enrolled me in a prestigious academy, hired a private family lawyer, and ordered me to permanently unpack my things. We stood together years later at a massive charity gala inside the Grand Beaumont Ballroom, surrounded by wealthy donors, when my parents arrived completely uninvited. Clara stepped up to the podium microphone and announced to the entire room that I was not only her legal ward, but her brilliant partner, and the only entirely honest Vance in existence. A collective gasp echoed through the crowd as Arthur's practiced smile tightened into a mask of pure rage. Later that evening, I witnessed Arthur cornering Clara near the dimly lit service hallway, his voice a low, vicious snarl as he threatened her. He warned her that if she kept implying theft, he would expose the fraudulent loan documents she had allegedly signed years ago. Clara stood completely paralyzed as Arthur leaned in closer, whispering that her signature on those bank records would cost her absolutely everything she owned. I hid behind the drywall, finally realizing that his terrifying hold over my aunt was built entirely on a foundation of forged financial paperwork. Back in the present conference room, Arthur's face had completely lost its calm composition as he furiously ordered Mr. Sterling to unlock the door immediately. Mr. Sterling refused to move, stating that the suspicious amendment Arthur had submitted this morning created a severe legal problem that could not be overlooked. Arthur let out a forced, nervous laugh, warning the attorney that making baseless accusations in front of wealthy witnesses constituted actionable defamation and slander. Mr. Sterling opened the master estate file, explaining that Clara's official notarized will had been safely secured in their vault for nearly a decade without any ambiguity. I stood up, loudly declaring that the document was an absolute lie, reminding everyone of Clara's final agonizing weeks in hospice where she was entirely comatose. Mr. Sterling calmly slid a sealed sapphire envelope across the table toward me, which contained a small brass key and a note telling me to let him lie. My blood ran cold with adrenaline as I placed my smartphone flat on the table and visibly pressed the record button, capturing everything. Arthur sneered, calling me a pathetic, brainwashed little girl, while Beatrice begged me to stop before I completely ruined my father's reputation forever. I inserted the brass key into Clara's private cabinet, revealing 6 heavily organized binders and a handwritten letter detailing Arthur's extensive crimes. The financial records explicitly proved that when I was 14, Arthur had entirely drained my inheritance to cover his failing corporate real estate debts, to prevent the bank from seizing his own assets. He had forged Aunt Clara's signature as a guarantor on a massive secondary loan. Arthur had used my grandmother's money to hide the initial fraud, cutting me off and labeling me unstable the moment I discovered the missing funds. Beatrice sank heavily into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably, while Mr. Sterling read aloud from Clara's personal letter, which detailed how Arthur had blackmailed her for 16 years. I pulled a charred plastic-wrapped document from my purse, sliding the single survived loan notice I had rescued from the fireplace years ago across the table. For the first time in his entire life, Arthur looked genuinely terrified of me as he realized I had been holding the final piece of the puzzle. Mr. Sterling closed the master binder, officially declaring that Clara's legitimate will stripped Arthur and Beatrice of absolutely every penny. Arthur made a desperate, chaotic move to snatch the files, but the office security guards instantly grabbed his wrists, pinning him back as papers scattered. Within a week, Clara's comprehensive files were distributed to every relative who had once eagerly repeated my father's disgusting lies about my mental health. His prominent business partners immediately severed all ties, and the state authorities launched a massive criminal investigation into his financial history. Beatrice cornered me in the hallway after the reading, weeping that she was simply terrified of Arthur's rage, but I stepped away from her forever. Months later, I officially transformed Clara's historic brick townhouse into the active headquarters for my grandmother's Youth Scholarship Foundation. Our very first financial grant was awarded to a young girl escaping a deeply abusive, unstable home environment, providing her with the structure needed to truly survive. I proudly kept Clara's original sapphire envelope beautifully framed directly behind my executive desk, not as a symbol of past trauma, but as undeniable proof of resilience. The truth can wait in absolute silence for decades, but it will always arrive with devastating precision right when it is needed most.